Some considerations on the Greek Anfang are beginning as the origin of the triune God. Um, so there's no triune God and nothing suggesting it prior to the accrual and generation of the Gospels. And then one can say, I put it that way because the Gospels didn't show up all at once, and neither did the four synoptical Gospels show up at once, but there was all kinds of different things like sayings of Jesus, which were then changed. I think Origen, for instance, he didn't have the synoptical Gospels. He had some kind of sayings of Jesus. And then he wove in Athenian philosophy, for instance, into his reading of the Song of Songs, where he brings in Eros, specifically Platonic Eros, and overlays it onto the term which appears in the Gospels, or in the writings of the Apostles. That's probably a more accurate wide term. In the writings of the Apostles, more broadly, agape, which is about funerals, was used. I don't know if it's widely accepted, but my intuitive sense, it probably is. But my intuitive sense is that Christ, in the Last Supper, this is the image of a funeral where the thought is of agape. So that's the colloquial way of talking about when you're at a funeral, thinking of the departed is agape or agape. Not sure on the pronunciation. But delivered in the whole episode is that since he's the one already dead, or the one being remembered as already dead, this is already Athenian philosophy, which also appears in Islam. So in Islam, it's, if I'm correctly informed, it said that when you don't convert to Islam, you revert, where the idea is you're going to go remember what the soul knew before you were born, which is like the remembering of the dead by some kind of transfer of meaning. I guess because those who envisage eternity, such as the mathematicians, and then such as Socrates says of the philosophers who would discover the essence of things, and then use them as call them reason, and then say this is there's no law that isn't reasonable, in this sense, that we could survey them as though we were dead, or as though we were shades that are looking at the scrolls in the library of the dead, and reading off eternal truths, therefore. So I think all that is clearly Athenian triune thinking. But why is there a triune thinking with the Athenians per se. It's because, in my opinion, because um, even though it hasn't settled yet in Plato, basically Plato thinks there's, remembering that the word fusus meant nothing basically, and it meant like growth pretty much in one passage for so-called Homer, um, in Odyssey, about a magical root, something to do with Circe, I think, and Odysseus, concerning the look of the thing, how to identify it, as it were, and also what it did, that it was had this soporific property. Something like this is the original usage of fuses, or at least it's the usage found in the archaic texts that survive. But so obviously, yeah, and then we have that explicitly in Aristotle asking which uses of fusus is the most serious, and then he concludes it's that which shows what the thing does when it does what it genuinely wants to do, when it's autonomous, as it were. As opposed, when it's not constrained by the heteronymous forces. Yeah, so that's basically still in Kant, but in a specific, the details of it are extremely carefully laid out in a way that therefore Kant is saying things that Aristotle didn't say, and especially because he's putting it into the idea of Newtonian physics, and trying to make it make sense. So we have these domains, one being where physics or fusus is supposed to happen, which gets sorted out basically as the outer domain, and then there's another domain, the outer domain, which however has the inner core of the principle of autonomy in it, and then we get the ethical domain, which corresponds to the Platonic psychology, and then we get logos, which connects them up. So you have these two domains connected up by logos. I think that's the and then there's always these attempts to get to the absolute and to disappear into the unity of the three. So that's what you see in Hegel, for instance. But it's already there, and it's then read into all of our thinking. I think in the sciences, usually what's left out is how powerful the logos, or the mode of transmission, is. That's treated as just one more factor alongside others, and then the main thing is how do you have some kind of correspondence between the knowledge or the technical instructions and the thing that you're talking about. So two realms kind of open up between ontology and epistemology, as they call it in analytic philosophy. But in the tradition, it's been three realms, I think, since the Athenians, and therefore it corresponds to the triune God. The body, Christ, Holy Spirit, transmits the logos, and God the Father, the eternal truth, which doesn't arise in time as the body does. So yeah, these type of Christological forms. Yeah, we should understand for one thing that's Judaism as in a way merged into that because they accepted, and especially Israel, because they accepted the is, accepted the philosophic is. So, for instance, modern Hebrew has taken this Genesis 3:14 word and turned it into the Kabbalah of the sentence, but that didn't exist in ancient Hebrew. And also the rabbis have developed another term for this in connection to the study of Aristotle in the Middle Ages. So it's known how this Hebrew language changed and was modified, but it's not so generally known that this had definite religio-philosophic motivations. So it's in order to change the original 3:14 text from what it meant to the so-called Yahwist or the First Temple religion to what became believed by the Athenians and then by Judaism. Judaism being the thing that developed in Hellenistic times, the thing that developed in the Hellenistic diaspora, even though there was a Jewish state. For most of that time, it was subordinate to the Eastern Empire. So basically, the Jews were cosmopolitans. A lot of things happened in Alexandria, where the library housed all the most important Athenian texts, alongside all kinds of other things. And there where the Septuagint were headquartered, for instance. So this is all very interpretive stuff that's happening there, and it has to do with religion, politics, and everything else. So we should see there, there's metaphysics that we could study the history of it in play in our current determinations and the current like this other concept, which has a lot of Dasman kind of power. People recognize it, the notion of the monotheistic religions. But that was something somebody said at some point. It's not it wasn't the original way any of these groups understood themselves still. Probably Grok could tell you when that was first became a practice, but it's a practice of some professor to start talking about it that way. So these things are tricky. And just to make one more comment in connection to that, I was thinking of if you're in Russia, I think the question of what a Jew is primarily answered by saying a Jew is something like a Armenian or like a Kazakhstani or somebody. It's a nation. It's basically a foreign nation within Russia. So you could talk about these minorities as these foreign nations. It's not primarily about the religion. That's always people in America always have to say, "Oh, I'm a secular Jew," or something, and then there's always some kind of confusion over which, if you're just trying to talk to people directly, it's very difficult to do. They're always kind of confused about how to express that because it takes some explanation of all the different cases. But from within that horizon, I think we could see why Heidegger, I think there's like 16 mentions supposedly in the Black Notebooks, which are like tagged as questionable by some parties because they had to do with Judaism or Jewish thinking. I think it's like, this is Jewish thinking, he's saying, and it's wrong or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if we are like Heidegger, then we're highly aware that there is Jewish thinking. It changes, and it's not. It's like saying, yeah, there's Heidegger's thinking, and he changed what he thought throughout his life. Talking about saying Heidegger's thinking is bad um, has some relation to Heidegger, but it doesn't mean oh, you have to put Heidegger to death because his thinking is bad, right? So I think that's how one has to think about the statements Heidegger makes about Jewish thinking.